Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the virtual workshop right now, Effective Strategies for Writing Instruction in Any Classroom. In this session, we will investigate what it means when we say writing is a process. We will also learn simple and easy ways to incorporate writing into the classroom, wherever those classrooms may be. We are educating students in unusual times using new methods. We're learning how to share our screens and connect virtually. Assignments that have worked for us in the past in a face-to-face classroom may not always be a slam dunk in the virtual setting. This session will explore best practices in writing instruction and writing strategies that can be incorporated into online, virtual, and hybrid classroom settings. They can also be used later when you're back to the face-to-face classroom. I am your host for today, Kim Carlton. Teacher-created materials is focused on one vision: to create a world in which children love to learn. Founded in the garage of a teacher over 40 years ago, Teacher-Created Materials is a company focused on creating materials and resources created by teachers, for teachers and students. Our founder, Rochelle Cracchiolo, embodies this spirit in many ways. Before we dive in any further, I want to direct you to the learning reflection guide that accompanies this virtual workshop. Throughout the webinar, you will be occasionally directed to stop and do something on that learning reflection guide. Anytime you see this image, you'll know that you need to pause the video and complete a reflection. Remember that you can pause or rewind the video at any time to take notes or process information. Let's jump right in. You're here today to examine the practice of writing strategies and support the writing process in virtual and alternate learning environments. We hope that you will find clear and engaging ways to encourage writing in students that's not overly complicated or too taxing on either the student or the educator. Today's session will help you establish the importance of writing in all classrooms, investigate the recursive writing process, discuss considerations and choices in designing writing activities that will all leverage best practices in writing instruction. Finally, you'll discover easy ways to engage in writing in any classroom setting. For today's session, all you'll need is something to write with and something to write on, along with your link to the Learning Reflection Guide. We will also be using a short article for our work today as a jumping off point for many of our writing activities. You can find that in your Learning Reflection Guide as well. So let's start with a simple question. Why writing? With all that we need to do for our students, for everything that they need to learn and master, and with all of the challenges of an unusual school year, why writing? And why writing now? Well, first, we benefit by writing because writing serves as a vehicle for learning both content and written expression. By teachers teaching writing, we not only grow our students as readers, but we also grow them in their content knowledge as they work to manipulate, interact, recall, and reread content area material to be able to respond in writing to prompts, text, video, and discussion. Research suggests that adding writing tasks improve comprehension and understanding of the content better than just reading that content by itself. When students write about their learning, they're verifying and deepening their understanding of the content as well as becoming better writers. Additionally, mounting evidence shows that writing is a crucial component of effective literacy instruction. When students are engaged regularly in the act of writing, they also show improvements in reading comprehension, math, science, and social studies. No one doubts the power of writing or the critical importance that it should play in all students' lives. The National Committee for Writing says, at its best, writing has helped transform the world. Revolutions have been started by writing. Oppression has been toppled by it. It has enlightened and made lives richer. With these findings in mind, getting children to be motivated, successful writers following best practices is a key component of effective literacy instruction and overall student achievement. So as we start our session today, it's important that we remember a few truisms about writing. First, writing is thinking on paper, and thinking can often be difficult. Writing requires that students balance a collection of skills all at the same time. They have to have ideas. They have to have the academic vocabulary to describe what they're thinking. That thinking has to be organized, and they have to imply the conventions of the English language. In many cases, those English convention rules can be abstract, and even the writing rules don't always follow the rules. But lastly, it's important to remember that writing is often very personal. We are asking students to share their thoughts, their ideas, their opinions, and their imagination with us. And when we critique that writing, it can often feel a little painful. Ultimately, what this means is that writing is hard. Writing is hard for students to do. Writing is hard for adults to assign, and writing is very hard for teachers to grade. So it's important that we keep these considerations in mind as we work through our work today. So in your own words, this would be a wonderful time to do a stop and do reflection. Thinking about the research that we've presented around the importance of teaching writing as part of literacy and content area instruction, take a moment to collect your thoughts. You can choose to pause the webinar now to respond to this task, or you can wait until the end of the session to complete this question. Unpause your video when you're ready to continue. So let's move on to our most important component when it comes to the discussion of teaching writing, the writing process. Based on the work of Donald Graves in the 1970s, the writing process focuses on the process it takes to create writing as opposed to just focusing on the final product. The writing process follows a recursive 5-stage process: pre-writing, drafting, revision, editing, and publication. The word recursive is important, as it suggests that students may move back and forth between the phases based on their topics and needs. For instance, a student may find that in the revision step that she needs to return to pre-writing in order to add more detail to a paragraph that isn't working. Let's dig in a little bit more to the writing process over the next few minutes. I want you to think about the last piece of important writing that you spent time on. Perhaps it was your resume or a letter to a supervisor or parent. What was your writing process? What were your steps? It's important to remember that writing is recursive and it is not a one-time or linear event. There is movement between the phases. The emphasis should be on the process, not the final product. We are teaching kids a set of steps for writing that will help them throughout life through any set of writing challenges. Let's look a bit deeper at the steps that make up Donald Graves' writing process. Pre-writing involves exploration. It is getting all of the ideas out to see what is best. Pre-writing can sometimes take place before pen is even put to paper. We may be pre-writing in our brains long before we've even sketched out a plan. Pre-writing is messy and unique to each student. And when writers generate ideas, try out thoughts, make decisions regarding the genre or form their final draft may take, or play with how a piece might develop, that is when they begin the pre-writing process and putting their thoughts in order. With beginning writers, pre-writing often starts with drawing or sketching. Drawing and sketching can even follow some of our older students, and it's the way that they prefer to think best. Drawing spans great writing topics and reveals a lot about writers. Pre-writing lessons can sometimes have a graphic organizer or a template, but they don't always have to be. Every student will find their own ways of what works best for them. Honor the students in what they know works best and allow them to reflect on what strategies have worked for them over the years. The key to the pre-writing phase is knowing that pre-writing doesn't always even have to lead to a final draft. Exploring writing in snippets and sentences in small bursts is actually a wonderful way to grow as a writer. If the students are writing, they're growing as writers, and that is what is important. Once you've had the opportunity to pre-write, we then move to drafting. Drafting is the act of getting the ideas down on paper. It's what happens after the student picks up the pencil and begins. It's when the ideas begin to take shape in the form of words, phrases, sentences, and paragraphs. It's this preliminary version of the text that gets written, and the expectation is it will be drafted and refined as we go. Mistakes are a part of drafting. I like to tell students that in order to make it better, we have to get it written down first. Drafting is generally easier and quicker if students spent time and thought and effort in the pre-writing stage. It should mostly engage the writer in thinking about their substance and meaning, what it is that they're trying to communicate. It may mean that when you're looking out into a classroom of students that are drafting, that not every kid is frantically writing. They might be pausing to consider ideas, reflect, or even return to the pre-writing stage when something isn't working. With young and beginner writers, drafting may be egocentric. They may have no notion that another audience will be reading this down the road. Young writers often don't draft in silence either. They're often observed talking to themselves, reading things out loud, or sounding out words letter by letter. Your job is to stress that the drafting stage is important for getting your thoughts down and finding your writing stride. Teachers often need to cut their students a little bit of slack during this stage, not to interrupt them and give them that writer's block thought if they're worried about making mistakes. It is, however, exhilarating to see a writer stop writing, put the pen down, and look back and think, my goodness, I just wrote that by myself. It's important for students to recognize that drafting doesn't have to be perfect, as it's not the last stage of the writing process. I've always liked to include this quote from Rebecca Harper in her work, Content Area Writing That Rocks and Works. She said, "We live our life through a series of rough drafts. Daily writing helps us organize our thoughts, synthesize information, and help us make sense of the world around us. And it's important to note that much of our drafting may never go anywhere. It's simply a place for us to organize our thoughts, make sense of our learning, and jot down our thinking at that time." For writing that gets a little bit more sophisticated, it is time to consider revision. Donald Graves once remarked that a first draft isn't even real writing because the real writing is when it goes through the revision process. It is not simply slapping paint on the canvas or throwing down the first words that come to mind and then leaving them untouched, he said. Real writing starts in the act of revision. It is only through revision that writing becomes real, he said. It's important to point out here that there is a difference between revision and editing. Often these two stages are grouped and lumped together into one giant word, revision and editing, but they are in fact distinctly different. Revision is about the refining of the author's ideas. Revision is making changes to the content to make the writing better. It's not about the editing correctness. That's for the next stage. Most teachers agree that the stage of revision should be separated from the stage of editing because each requires a different kind of focus. For beginning writers, revision is mostly adding. Later, students learn to revise not just by adding, but also taking out or choosing different words and reorganizing ideas into new paragraphs. Again, remember that the writing process is recursive. Part of revision might lead a writer back to pre-writing or drafting for a bit to produce more ideas to add. Revision is perhaps the stage where students can learn the most about themselves as writers. Individual learning is often driven by conferences and conversations with teachers and peers, sharing their drafts for feedback. Educators must provide instruction as part of the revision process as well. This often takes the form of mini lessons or mentor text or models. Teachers have to provide the time and space for students to practice the revision process explicitly, using just small pieces of writing and moving up to larger drafts. The more practice that students have with revision, the more likely that revision will become a part of their own writing process. Many educators refer to the acronym or anchor chart ARMS as a reminder to students of the components of revision. At the base level, the work of revision is simply adding, removing, moving, or substituting. That can be in the form of paragraphs, sentences, or even individual words. ARMS is not intended to be a checklist. Not all students need all 4 techniques to improve their writing. For some students, they need to add more details for elaboration. But for others, they've written too much and have gone off track. They might need to remove or substitute information. If revision is messing up the first draft, then editing is fixing it up for readability and conventions. The focus here is on conventions like capitalization, grammar, punctuation, and spelling. It's preparing the writing to be read by others. Expecting for students to produce an error-free draft can be very overwhelming. Hoping that students can just get into a circle and peer edit each other's paper puts a lot of shoulders on a student editor as well. For a more productive time in the editing phase, teachers should target specific age-appropriate skills to focus on during editing, such as the capitalization of a proper noun or using a comma in a compound sentence. This reduces the student feeling of helplessness when looking at a draft or becoming overwhelmed when faced with creating a draft where there are no errors in the very confusing English language. By beginning teaching a small editing skill one at a time and then allowing students time to return to their drafts and correct that one thing, gradually classrooms can develop their own editing checklists to promote successful and confident writers. Editing should always include age-appropriate skills that teachers have taught or reviewed with students. It doesn't make sense to have students edit for all of the grammar skills that exist because they have likely not been taught all of the rules of grammar. Much like arms for revision, many educators use the acronym CUPS as a reminder of the key elements of the editing process. And while this anchor chart alone will not be enough just to give to kids and tell them to edit their writing, it is a simple and clear reminder of the work that would be done at this stage of the writing process: capitalization, usage, punctuation, and spelling. Finally, we arrive at the last step of the writing process: publishing. Publishing writing makes writing real and gives it purpose. Students are inspired by the publishing of their own writing, hearing their own voices read and shared aloud. They want other students or adults to see and hear their finished work and see what all of their hard work turned into. Publication can take many forms: classroom books, newsletters, bulletin boards, the author's chair, even simple peer shares or class magazines are all examples of publication. A wider audience could include sharing it with family, extended family, other classes, the school at large, members of the community, or even famous and important people. There are endless publishing opportunities that abound throughout social media and the internet. This work and focus on teaching the recursive writing process is supported by research. In the seminal 2007 Writing Next report, writing strategies is listed as one of the 11 recommendations for writing instruction for students. The number 1 item was teaching writing strategies and giving students ways to plan, revise, and edit their work. According to the report, teaching adolescents strategies for planning, revision, and editing of their compositions shows a dramatic effect on the quality of their writing. Strategy and instruction involves explicitly and systematically teaching those steps necessary. The ultimate goal is to teach students to use those strategies independently. Now that we have taken a deep dive into the writing process, let's reflect a bit. What parts of the writing process are most difficult for your students? Why do you think that is? You can choose to pause the webinar now to complete this task, or to wait until the end of the webinar and complete it at the end of the session. Unpause your video when you are ready to continue. Now that you understand the recursive nature of the writing process, let's take a look at the choices that teachers make when assigning writing tasks to students. I call these our writing considerations. Every opportunity for writing requires that teachers investigate, decide, and communicate those expectations to students. To do this, we should ask ourselves 3 questions. First, how formal should the writing be? In his popular article, Writing Across the Curriculum, Steve Piha provides 3 easy-to-follow categories to help disciplinary teachers see that not all writing is the same. Piha describes this as casual writing or informal writing, semi-formal writing, and formal writing. Notice his use of the social dress code, informal, semi-formal, and formal, as a metaphor for writing. In essence, these activities go from low-stakes writing for yourself to medium-level writing that might be graded or turned in, to high-stakes long-term writing that you might only complete a time or maybe even 2 times a year. By easing students into writing in content area classrooms, they begin to write with confidence, developing routines and choices for writing, avoiding the feelings of anxiety that make them dread writing as a chore. Think about which pair you'd most likely want to wear on a daily basis. We rarely wear formal attire every day, just like we rarely write formally for everyday writing. However, informal writing is sometimes not enough to get the job done. These 3 important distinctions allow teachers to describe how much work both the student and the teacher should do with the piece of writing. The second consideration is the purpose for writing. In Rebecca Harper's book, Content Area Writing That Rocks and Works, she presents 5 main writing purposes. Writing, she said, can be used as a tool for thinking, for proving opinions, for summarizing, for learning, and for organizing. Obviously, there are more purposes for writing than just these 5, and sometimes there are opportunities for these 5 writing ideas to mix and mingle. Writing is evolving and changing as technology advances, and additional types of media become more and more common. Writing is versatile, but it does have unique properties that change depending on the objective. Thinking about what purpose students would have for writing before it is assigned will be closely connected to the writing formality. If you are asking students to write to think, it would likely be informal writing. However, if you are asking students to write to prove or to summarize, that might be writing that is more semi-formal, something that might be turned in, collected, and graded from a teacher to show evidence of learning. It would not be appropriate to take a child's writing that they've just done to learn or to think and assess it like it is a formal paper. That brings us to our third writing consideration. How will you assess student writing? This too should match the formality and purpose, our first 2 writing considerations. There are 3 options that are available to you. Sometimes we want to reward and acknowledge a student's writing simply as a quick completion grade. We want to thank them for doing an attempt at the work. Writing to learn or writing to think, something done in a learning journal or as exit ticket, might be graded in this way. However, if you're spending some class time giving kids the opportunity to collect their thoughts, to draft, perhaps even to reread or return to a piece of text, maybe even attempting a revision technique, this might be a more semi-formal kind of writing. This would require a little bit more assessment. For these, I often use what I like to call a stack and sort grading method. Picking up each student writing only once, I determine if it meets the expectations or exceeds the expectations, or if it attempts the expectations but doesn't necessarily meet all the components, or maybe it is not the student's best effort at the work. These 4 categories or piles can then easily be assigned a number or letter grade. For instance, the student who met and exceeded the requirements might receive 95s, those who met the necessary components an 85, 75, and so on. This simple system allows me to focus primarily on the content without overwhelming the student work and my workload with lots of corrections or errors. The final assessment method is a writing rubric. I reserve these for writing that takes more time, both on the student as well as me as a grader and the time that we spend together in class. Here, students will likely have drafted. They will have spent time revising and probably editing. There were mentor texts and many lessons involved. In this case, we would share the writing rubric with students in advance so they would know before they begin writing how they were to be assessed. In making a rubric, it should be clear to weight the content as much or even more so than the conventions of writing. Most of us would agree that great ideas are more important than a single run-on sentence. I ask for you to keep this one additional piece in mind and close to your heart. This is a picture drawn by my goddaughter on my birthday in my birthday card. I should note that my hair is not this color, nor am I this short. There are no fingers on this drawing, and my arms in real life are not made of rectangles. I seldomly wear dresses this fancy, and the fit is clearly all wrong. But I didn't send this art back with corrections. That wouldn't be the point. We should not have student writing that is an art, be marked with every error that a child makes. Writing is a way of communicating with the world. Developing writers will not find it helpful to see every small error marked. It is more important their content and their intent. My goddaughter clearly thinks I am fabulous. She wanted to wish me a happy birthday. That message was clearly conveyed through this drawing. The fact that I don't have hands here doesn't take away from this message. So as you can see, it's not important to grade every single error that's wrong. Keep that in mind when holding a student's paper in your hand. Remember to keep the message ahead of the corrections. All right, we've accomplished our first 3 goals. Now it's time to leverage some of these best practices in writing instruction in some opportunities to engage in writing that you can use in any classroom. Many of these upcoming examples are what I like to call small writing, writing that is mainly informal, done in class, and often done quickly. But with the right instruction, small writing can be used to support small revision and editing techniques. You might use small writing as pre-writing to more formal examples of writing in the content areas. At its core, small writing gives students the chance and opportunity to explore new ideas and get their thoughts down on paper. At this point, let's take a few minutes to stop and read a mentor text that we will use for the rest of our work today. The text, High Risk, comes from our 8th grade Write Time for Kids series. This shared mentor text will allow us to model some strategies and writing techniques just like you might do in your own classroom. And while this text might be higher than one you would use with your own students, please know that you could use any other rich mentor text for this work. Take a moment to pause the webinar now to complete this task. You can find the text in your Learning Reflection Guide. Unpause the video after you've read and you're ready to continue. Small writing opportunities are an important part of writing instruction. According to Kelly Gallagher and Penny Kittle, if a student only writes a few big essays, she's not getting enough practice with the writing process to improve significantly. That pathway doesn't provide enough practice for writers. Small writing tasks sprinkled throughout the year can allow for these engaging opportunities for drafting, revision, and/or editing on manageable, shorter pieces of text. Additionally, they take less time to produce and allow for quicker assessment and feedback from instructors. Small writing can take many forms and find a home in any content area or grade level. Many of these small writing opportunities could simply be informal writing that's graded for completion or spot checked. Perhaps it's more semi-formal writing that kids turn in as an exit ticket or a quick formative assessment. And still, some of these small writing opportunities could be turned into larger or more formal pieces of writing, providing not just necessary practice in writing skills, but early drafts for portions of longer or more in-depth or more formal papers. We will share a few strategies here and ask that you try them out as a writer yourself, so get your pencils handy. We're going to practice a little quick writing with this mentor text. Remember, we are using it to engage and explore the concepts that you just read about. This is short, informal, or casual writing, asking a participant to process and think about information. Taking a look at the mentor text, zoom in and look at the graphic. Pause the video, do just a quick 2-minute burst of writing on a Post-it note or the back of a sheet of paper. Looking at the graphic, ask yourself, how is the climbing experience risky for the Sherpas? This was an example of writing to learn. Casual and informal writing is intended to encourage students to explore, think, and connect prior knowledge with new learning or information. This kind of informal writing is done frequently in classrooms. I might have students stop to jot their thoughts and thinking 3 or even 5 times in a typical class period. Students might jot them in a notebook or even on a Post-it note or a note card. Having students write to learn really focuses on allowing them the time and opportunity to gather and formulate ideas. This is writing that I assess informally and in many cases not at all. Informal writing can serve as a jumping off point to generating more ideas for more formal writing and makes a wonderful opportunity for collaborative discussion. Writing to learn encourages students to pause, to think, and to connect with new ideas and new learning. Examples of this writing to learn might include making lists, graphic organizers, jotting on Post-it notes, annotating on a text, exit tickets, journal writing, quick writes, or even tea journals. The point here is not to make the work taxing. This should be 2 to 5 minutes of writing at most. And remember, this is informal writing that is rarely assessed. As a teacher, I enjoyed informal writing often because it allowed me to assess where students were in their thinking and allowed the students time to chunk and chew the content and new information. Informal writing has many classroom benefits. First, it helps teach and reinforce a lifelong skill, and that is to jot down and think about what you're going to say before you say it. I often used informal writing as a precursor to classroom discussions. Informal writing also allows all children to have adequate processing time. You can engage all students then in the process and discussion that follows, since they have all had the opportunity to stop, jot, and collect their thoughts. It also allows you to pace your instructional time, giving you a moment to set up a screen, to take attendance, and still keep your students on task with their learning. Also, it allows students and participants the opportunity to explore new ideas through writing. Hopefully, we've all had the experience of once we begin to write something down, we think of more things. And then finally, practically, it helps me with classroom management. It allows me to have students stop and jot their thinking so that I can monitor for comprehension. When we launch into classroom discussion, I'm not calling on kids cold call to blurt out answers. Instead, every child has had the opportunity to process and collect their thinking before we begin a classroom discussion. One example to provide some structure to these quick writes might be with a simple T-chart like this: what I think and why I think it. I like this because this does not need to be a worksheet. Students can draw this on their own paper. You could further scaffold this with sentence frames in the columns. Here, students might pinpoint something specific And then in the other column, why or what specific evidence they can pull from to make that statement. This means that the quick write is not just opinion-based, but also connects students back to the text or informational resource. And remember, students of all levels can benefit from sentence starters or sentence frames, and this is especially true for our English language learners. These 3 sentence starters are a great place to start in any classroom and any grade level. I have them on an anchor chart in my classroom. We often took a few minutes to stop and reflect throughout that day's lesson. I could point to that anchor chart and ask them to choose one and jot just a quick sentence or 2 about the last chunk of information we had talked about. You can further add to this list based on your content area and student needs. We're going to start at one of my favorite writing purposes, writing to summarize. It's a great place to start because it can be used in any content area or grade level. Anytime students have been given content, that could be a text, a video, step-by-step instructions, even an image or a graphic, they can summarize. According to Rebecca Harper, summarizing content requires that students divulge what they have taken away from material in an organized and brief manner. So why start with summary? Well, summary is more than just an easy place to start with writing. Research suggests it's also one of the best. The National Reading Panel identified 16 categories of instruction, 7 things that appear to have solid scientific basis for improving reading comprehension. Summary was one of those 7. When students use summary appropriately, it assists in recall, question answering, question generation, and the summarization of larger text. The second reason is actually one for writing. The Writing Next report identifies 11 elements of current writing instruction found to be effective for helping students learn to write well. The writing of summary is one of those 11 strategies. It is supported by rigorous research. It involves explicitly and systematically teaching students how to summarize text. The next activity will do both and support our students both as readers and as writers. And if you remember from earlier in our presentation, help them learn content. We call this the $5 summary. Sometimes when students construct summaries, they include a lot of extraneous information, or they hardly include enough. The $5 summary can be used across content areas to help students identify key details and guide them to craft concise summaries. By assigning a specific dollar amount and a word count, students are able to see exactly how much material is required to produce a summary. In this activity, each word is worth 10 cents. Students will be asked to complete a summary that totals no more than $5. That is equal to 50 words. As a teacher, you can vary the assigned monetary value based on the assignment or the material, or just to keep things interesting. You might have students complete a $3 summary or a $10 summary of a larger work. This is a summary of the movie The Wizard of Oz. I've seen it 1,000 times, so I know it by heart. The summary is 91 words, or $9.10. It's way over budget. This was my first draft, but it allows me a great place to revise. I need to get this summary down to 50 words or less, that $5 summary. As I reread what I have written, I can find places that are wordy or redundant. I can find sections that might be combined into fewer words. I noticed the phrase "a young girl" could be easily translated to just Dorothy. In order to revise your summary, you really do have to weigh the content, deciding what is most important, while balancing and applying the use of various grammatical structures like syntax and word choice and even subject-verb agreement and keeping things in cause and effect order. Let me show you the revised summary. This one clocks in at exactly $5 or 50 words. It took a lot more work to revise than I had even expected. As a writer, I really had to weigh what was most important. I had to check my word choice to make sure there were no extraneous words. As you see, the two summaries side by side, just the opening sentences can tell you about how the revised draft became a more sophisticated and concise example. The copy to the left is the original draft that clocked in at 31 words or $3.10, more than half my budget. The copy to the right is the revised version at only 20 words or $2. Looking at these two pieces side by side, the first draft and the revision, you can see that as a writer, I had to use different techniques to meet my goal. Now it's your turn. Pause the video now to write and revise your summary so it comes in at $5 or 50 words. Remember that your summary should still maintain all of the vital elements from your source material. So be careful to look at word choice and syntax to manipulate your rough draft to meet your spending limit. If your original draft comes in at $2, you know you'll need to add some detail. If your rough draft was over $6, you'll know you'll need to revise and make your writing more concise. Pause the video now to complete this task and reflection, and unpause when you are ready to begin again. I'd like for you now to take a look at your virtual note-taking guide and complete this reflection. What skills did you use as a writer to not only create, but also revise your $5 summary? Think about that if these are the skills that you used in this small writing activity, your students would also gain those benefits as well. Pause the video to complete the reflection now, or you're welcome to complete it at the end of the course. I know for me, crafting a summary meant I had to understand main idea, important details, and in order to get it into $5, I had to consider word choice, syntax, and punctuation, and in fact, there was even a little bit of math. These frequent engagements in writing improve the quality of our writing, according to Tom Romano in his book, Crafting Authentic Voice. He likes to call these rapid writings. There are additional variations to this summary activity that I'd like to share with you here. They are also from the book, Content Area Writing That Rocks and Works by Rebecca Harper. Teachers can use variations of this summary strategy to support students with both reading and writing through summary. The first is called a postcard summary. In it, students are asked to take a traditional 3x5 note card and create a postcard to summarize an event, a text, an image, or something that they have read. The difference here is that you may have to take a minute to teach kids and show kids what a summary or what a postcard is, but you'll notice it incorporates visuals. Students like being able to draw their meaning, and the postcard summaries look amazing dressed up around your room to show off what kids are learning. You can see some examples here in both social studies and mathematics. Another variation working with even shorter summaries is the social media summary. Because many students are fluent in using social media, hashtags, Instagrams, tweets, and emojis, social media summaries provide another engaging avenue to have students interact with material through the art of summary. While there are several social media platforms you could use to do this, I often choose to have students write their social media summaries directly on paper. You can see in this variation, students are asked to complete a 280-character tweet. This forces them to be very succinct in their thinking. But there's an interesting addition through the use of a hashtag. A hashtag is a clever way to emphasize the main idea of the text. In doing the social media summary, students are limited to only 280 characters, but can further emphasize the main idea through the clever use of hashtags. These social media summaries can be posted on your own in-class Twitter wall as a way to show off those summarizing skills. We're now going to look at another purpose and strategy for small writing. This is writing to prove. What exactly is writing to prove? Well, often teachers give students writing tasks that require them to explain or provide evidence or proof for their answers. Many times, students write to explain something to the reader. On other occasions, they're trying to prove to the reader that they've done the homework or the reading. Finding appropriate text evidence is something that has to be mastered in all content areas and is always a challenge. In some cases, students may struggle with locating quality evidence that adequately justifies their answer. Quite often, they think that just stating an opinion is sufficient enough. Other times, students are able to find and state evidence without thinking critically about what it proves. Finding textual evidence will not always help a student provide and prove their point. They need to be able to make a point and to prove it. Writing to prove strategies require students do more than simply just state their opinion or point to a piece of text evidence. These are strategies that combine these two together. The simplest of these is called create a simile. In it, students are asked to provide a simile based on a model where they are asked to follow a very simple sentence structure. Let's try an example using our mentor text. Here's an example about our recent lives. Quarantine is like a movie Groundhog Day because every day feels the same, but then you make your peace with it and start to have some fun. Notice that the teacher provides the portion in red, giving the students also a model of a simile to work from. You may have to remind or pre-teach what a simile is. Here you'll explain to students that they will create their own similes that follow the sentence frame, blank is like blank because blank. Have students choose words, images, and phrases to create their own similes related to the subject or content. Pause the video and give it a try. Being a Sherpa is like blank because blank. You can try this technique out on your own learning reflection guide using the sentence frame. Pause the webinar now and give it a go, and unpause when you're ready to continue. We're now going to investigate a way for you to revise that simile that you just wrote using a technique called Scamper. Scamper is revision of a single word. This has proven to be a very successful technique used in my classroom because we only are asking students to change a single word of their text. We're also giving them ways in which they could change it. That's where Scamper comes in. Scamper stands for substitute, where a student may substitute a new word for one that they have written. Combine, where they could take two or more words and condense them into one. Adapt, perhaps borrowing a word from around the room or from a friend. Magnify, exaggerate, and make a word bigger. Put it to another use, which is where you might use a word in a new or interesting way. Eliminate, which would delete an unnecessary or unneeded word, or rearrange and reorder the words. Return back to your draft simile. How can Scamper support you in your revising today, but also support your students with revising in your classroom? Take a moment to complete the activity on your own and then reflect on how it changed your draft and how it may support your students. Pause the webinar now to complete this task and reflection. Unpause the video when you're ready to continue. We have arrived at the end of our session today, and we've accomplished large goals during our time. Let's take a look at it again. First, we established the importance of writing in all classrooms. Next, we investigated the nature of the writing process. We discussed the considerations and choices that teachers make in designing writing activities. We learned how to leverage those best practices in designing small writing instruction for our classrooms and discovered easy ways to engage students in writing in any classroom setting. It's now time for our final reflection question. Let's reflect on a few of these small writing strategies that you have used and that you can use in your classroom now at any time with any text or topic. How can you use small writing opportunities in your classroom to support those best practices? Pause the webinar now to reflect and complete this task. Unpause the video when you're ready to continue. If you'd like to learn more from teacher-created materials, check out the free professional development learning options at the link shown on the screen. We have many more topics for you to investigate. And remember, we want to continue to support you no matter where you're teaching, today or in the future. As a company founded and run by teachers, we know your time is valuable. We appreciate you spending some of that time today with us and hope this training will help you be successful in implementing writing in any classroom situation. Don't forget to complete that learning reflection guide that accompanies this webinar to answer those questions and reflections, as well as to access that model text. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing a world in which children love to learn.